let you take it away, Mayor Driscoll. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for logging on. Beautiful day today, beautiful afternoon, and I appreciate the chance to be with you. I thought it would be helpful if I offered, some comments about what I see as the work ahead, some of the challenges that we have, many of the things we're working on, and I really do view many of you as partners in those efforts, whether it's housing or transportation or the cleanup that Chris just mentioned. A lot of us really care about this place, and I feel really lucky to be mayor of a community that has such an engaged population where people really want to try and make a difference. And I think in Salem, it's not just politics. It's really willing to stand up and support important community values. One of the reasons I really appreciate local government and why I continue to want to serve in local government is because it really feels like a space to me where we can solve problems together and make a meaningful impact on the lives of the people who live here. That's certainly what I strive to do in my role as mayor. I'm a Democrat, but certainly the mayor's race is nonpartisan, and there's no, as people famously say, there's no Democratic or Republican pothole, right? We're just trying to solve problems. And the work involves a mix of delivering city services, trying to get better at how we do that, this culture, having a culture of continuous improvement. I think we've really honed in on that here. We don't pick up trash the way we used to. We don't solve crimes the way we used to. Like, we are willing to embrace an ability to try new things and not to be stuck in, well, we've always done it that way, or at least that's what we strive to do. I think the other piece is really working with residents on larger visions for your city. We have city services that need to get delivered every day. We know how important that is. The work that we do in local government, from educating kids to keeping neighborhoods safe, really matters. But we also want to be looking at ways we can do it better and recognize that can sometimes mean slings and arrows are coming at you, but it also might open up, amazing opportunities. And I firmly believe like great cities just don't happen. It takes planning and engagement and sometimes messy, uncomfortable conversations, usually with people right? We're in a small city our size or medium city our size, people that you know and like, where you can have disagreements. And there definitely are at times imperfect solutions. Maybe the wording is actually there are times perfect solutions. Most of the solutions are imperfect. And it takes a lot of really hard work by a lot of people. At the end of the day, I try and engage us in what the work that I do. Are we getting better? Are we moving forward? Are we being true to our community values? And I thought as a $170 million organization, it's important the work that we're doing, that all of us rely on, be looked at in that lens. Are we getting better? Trying to be self-reflective about the work that I do and the work we do together as a community is really, I think, an important aspect for any leader, but particularly for somebody in a city. Some of the items that we're working on and some of the major challenges we expect to face, I thought that would be a good space to sort of have a conversation, and doing that through the lens of Salem's 400th. Salem will turn 400 in 2026, our quadricentennial. And I think it really presents a good opportunity for us to be thoughtful about how we want to shape our community and how we want to evolve and grow. We're fortunate to have all this history. I call it an embarrassment of riches, the amount of historic events and activities that took place here, and the way Salem has grown and evolved and thrived throughout nearly four centuries is pretty impressive. When we began this initiative called Imagine Salem, it was really trying to work with our community to identify, hey, what do we want to be when we grow up, right? What do we want to be when we're 400? What's the expectation for how we're going to educate kids, or who's going to live here? And I think bringing people together for that conversation harnessed a lot of goodwill. And we saw a lot of aligned visioning around areas like housing. People, and I view these challenges we have around housing, transportation, climate change, economic activity. You need to have a thriving economy, and then diversity and how we ensure we want to live in a diverse community, how we ensure we're thinking about that and breaking down barriers and recognizing this awakening that we're all experiencing in our country over the last year, and long overdue conversation. So maybe just to talk a little bit about each of those, and then I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for Q&A. So housing, many of you know, I really feel very strongly that housing is one of Salem's biggest, if not the biggest challenge that we're facing. We're in a robust housing market in Greater Boston. No mayor in America controls the real estate market, and we are on fire here. Prices continue to rise. When I think they can't go any higher, they continue to do so. And that means we've got to find ways, if we do really want to be a community where every person has a right to safe, affordable, life-enriching housing. And I think that's where the space we occupy in general as residents, is that we have always been a community where the person who owns the hotel and the person who works in the hotel can live in our community. The person who captained the ship and owned the financing for it lived next to the people who worked on the docks and unloaded things. And the ability for us to have this healthy ecosystem is really being challenged by a very, very, very fast and rapidly rising real estate market. And it's pushing people out. People who have always poured coffee or poured beer for a living are finding it harder to live here. People who haven't bought a home, who are outliving their savings, are finding themselves outpriced in the community they grew up in and loved. Those of us who are fortunate to own homes, we're getting a nice big nest egg, right, as property values go up. But that doesn't mean that our young adult children or others that we care about in our community have an ability to live here. That means we need to act. We can't necessarily control the market, but I'd like to think that we can shape some of the things that are happening here. So looking at policies, whether it's the hard fought for accessory dwelling unit policy, the unsuccessful but implemented via policy inclusionary zoning, finding ways to leverage, in essence, private investment in existing properties to help supply additional affordable housing. We've got an active affordable housing trust fund board. I chair it. I also serve on the Salem Housing Authority, who we believe can be another key partner as we look to leverage public access to build projects and promote housing for people, particularly in the middle. I mean, we certainly want to make sure we're building housing as we think about those that need huge amounts of larger subsidies. Those would be typical properties you see within a housing nonprofit or our housing authority. But we know there's a whole lot of people who used to live on lots of apartments on Cabot Street and in neighborhoods where, it was naturally occurring affordable housing. And they're really, really struggling that middle hole to find housing that works. So these are folks who are working, but they make too much to qualify for a subsidy, but not enough to afford high rising rents. And some of the strategies that we have are looking at even housing acquisition to help purchase some of these multifamily units. That's where we're seeing our highest growth. So a combination of both policies, programs, projects, and partnerships aimed at ensuring that we can provide for the people in our community who live here, but more importantly, to develop that housing value that I think we have. People can live in this community in a safe way and evolve and grow. And that is under threat. I don't think the answer to that is moratoriums. I don't think the answer to that is making it harder to develop in Salem. I'd love to see more affordable housing, and I think those are goals that we have. But just to keep people in check on what is happening, 18% of the housing that's been either created, permitted, or built, so under construction, permitted, or built in Salem, has actually been affordable. This is over the last 5 years, since 2016. That's 234 affordable housing units. Is it enough? No. But this notion that no one's paying attention to affordable housing and we're not doing anything is pretty far from the truth. As we move into additional space of looking at projects and trying to promote ways that we can be better at solving our community's housing needs. That's going to be front and center over the next 4 years as well. It's hard to talk about housing without talking about transportation, because lots of times the pushback around housing is tied to too many cars, where traffic congestion, where a city that's only 8 square miles. We really feel like we have to braid together solutions around housing and growth. It's one of the reasons a lot of the new developments are paying into a transportation enhancement fund. It's why when we set up the cannabis retail process in Salem, we included an additional 1% of revenues to go into a transportation enhancement fund. So we could find ways to be more of a car-light community. And that has resulted in programs like the Salem Skipper. We're really thrilled to have a ride share that's an affordable program to get people around Salem. We've talked with our surrounding community partners and neighbors about expanding that. We will be expanding with Salem State this fall. They're going to be contributing to it and working with student usage of that and getting rid of their sort of van system that they had that didn't really work well for them. But this will enable us to actually enhance both hours and some of the locations where Salem Skipper goes. It's also led to things like our bike sharing program. We had Zagster here for many years. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of took them out at the knees. We now have Blue Bikes. Blue Bikes is a little bit more expensive, but the blessing of having Blue Bikes is we have one system throughout all of Greater Boston, which means you can be a Blue Bike member in Salem and use it in Boston or any other community that you live in. They're in 17 communities in I know they're growing, and hopefully we'll be able to see growth right here on the North Shore. If Beverly's interested, Peabody's interested, so we'd have shared bike services there. And the other piece of that is looking at infrastructure. How do we get a community that's a little bit more friendly towards walking and biking? Well, you need the physical infrastructure to do that. We've built over 4.5 miles of on-street bike accommodations and shared use paths, and more to come. We have a community streets policy where we really see roads not just for cars, but as a means to share other alternative means of transportation. And I think that's really the key in a city that's 8 square miles. We're not talking about long distances. Those of us who are able or interested could walk or bike. We have ride shares and other ways to get people in and around our community, and hope to expand that. We're also looking at larger visions like the South Salem commuter rail that would service both Salem State and North Shore Medical Center. That's not a crazy pipe dream. It's a lot of money. It's around $25 to $30 million. But in transportation speak, guys, that's not a lot of money. So we just advanced some of the additional work that's necessary for engineering and permitting with Congressman Moulton's office through some grant programs there. And while commuter rail ridership is down right now, we know that's temporary. Something's going to happen with respect to people needing to get back and forth to Boston. And as we move forward, a key goal that I have for the state would be to electrify that line. The beauty of that would mean we could have way shorter headways. You could have train service that's every 10, 15, 20 minutes if you wanted to, between communities especially, and really create a hub. We know getting north and south is easy, getting east and west not so much, and that's where maybe a community car share or even our own North Shore Regional Transportation Authority could be helpful in moving people for where they want to go, again, without everybody in their own vehicle. When I drive to work most days, and I look, and it's me, the one person in a car, and a lot of one people in a car, and we talk about traffic. I'm the traffic. Some of us are the traffic who still require or need a vehicle to get to work or to live our lives. And I also want to say most of the development we're having in Salem is redevelopment. When I go down Bridge Street a fair amount, I'm excited about that project coming online that will have bike lanes and make it easier to get to and from work or home or school or wherever you might be traveling in Salem. And eventually, very shortly, you'll be able to get all the way from downtown Marblehead to downtown Salem, all off-road. And the plans are to do the same in downtown Peabody to downtown Salem as they do their work in the old Blubber Hollow neighborhood. But we've had some growth in that neighborhood. I drive home that way fairly frequently. And if it takes me a little bit longer, I think it's worth it if we're putting roofs over people's head in a safe way and hopefully in an affordable way. Both of those projects are at least 10% affordable. And I know that they're serving the needs of people in our community who need housing for sure. As we think about transportation, I also just want to call out climate change and some of the work that we have done in conjunction with the city of Beverly. Our Resilient Together plan with Salem and Beverly together did two things. It did an assessment of where are our biggest greenhouse gas contributors, and to no one's surprise, it's transportation, it's cars, it's vehicles. And so, we need to think of our ability to house people and our land use policies and find alternative means of transportation. For some reason, bike lanes can be a trigger in Salem for people. Maybe some of you have mentioned that or seen that. For me, I look at them as a way that we can do our part for climate change. Even if you never use a bike lane, we know that roads are safer when they have bike lanes on them, when there are multiple modes of transportation. And for those of us who are using them or do take advantage of them, it's a huge help in terms of reducing and mitigating the impacts of greenhouse gases in our community. I do want to touch on Resilient Together a little bit more because I feel like we did a lot of that work during the pandemic. And while a lot of people know about it, it also hasn't necessarily gotten as much energy around it, but we are really excited about the investments we're making in building a more resilient future here in Salem. We're not going to outrun climate change. Nobody is. We're a coastal community. And we just this new fiscal year, which started in July, invested about $250,000 in additional personnel, primarily for our sustainability department, a division within our city that will be focused on it. Prior to that, sustainability was a little bit of everyone's job. The Conservation Commission and Planning Department did some of it. The engineering office did some of it, but it didn't have one shop that really owned what are we doing. We knew we were going to be finishing up this action plan and really wanted to have it have ownership and agency within Salem, and therefore created this sustainability division led by Jenna Ide. Some of you may know Jenna, like super talented, really has a great deal of know-how in this space. And we're approaching it from a couple of different ways. One is, as a city, what can we do to improve our energy efficiency. And to be honest, that's probably the area we've spent the most amount of time so far. We've saved over 2 million kilowatts of energy, $6 million in savings, and $25,000 in less greenhouse gas emissions due to some of our own efforts, whether that's purchasing our street lights and putting in LEDs, other activities that we've taken on as a city. But there's more for us to do in that space. There's a ton of work for us to do in community engagement. Some of the areas we see opportunities are working with private property owners, both commercial and residential, to seed and incentivize more energy efficient systems, just how we use energy on the demand side, and really making sure people understand what's even available. There's a wealth of existing incentives from our utility players that we know we haven't fully taken advantage of in Salem. We've done a lot, but we can do more to make sure community members know about that. And then what's our policy initiatives look like? Salem was one of the first green cities in Massachusetts when that designation came out from the state, and garnered all kinds of additional grant dollars and helped sort of put us on the map as a place that can do really good work in this space. And we're now ready for sort of 2.0, and this plan will help us get there. And that means adopting even a higher stretch code, looking at how we're building new in our community. Can we look towards more green building opportunities? And I would say that the manufacturing, the equipment, the supply chain, that's getting better too. So how do we think about our community moving forward, our city, our community members, residents who live here, and then new growth or development that's happening in a longer fashion? And what are we going to do to incentivize that? We don't want to put more hurdles in terms of developing things like community housing, but nor do we want to ignore what's happening with climate change. And I think there's a way to have our cake and eat it too. And we're excited to work on that. And we know it's necessary. And again, long overdue. I've been to Europe a few times, urban futures conferences, really trying to understand how we can position ourselves. And frankly, Salem's built closer to a European nation or a small European city. We don't look like Seattle, Washington. We look like, downtown Oslo or other places that have been around a lot longer than Salem, and they're so far ahead of us. Finding ways to both change our habits, but also identify policies where we can lead in this space, I think is really important. We're not going to seawall our way out of it, and we're certainly need to be mindful of that as we move forward. One area that I think has some overlap with our climate change goals is in parks and open space. We're really fortunate in Salem to have over 26 parks and playgrounds throughout our city. We're only 8 square miles. Just about every neighborhood is within walking distance to a park. And we've really tried to make investments in parks. We're aggressive around grants. Those of you who follow what's happening in our city, I don't like it when we don't get a grant. We're really very good at going out and making sure we're doing the engineering and the planning, and sometimes we need to make those investments and spending money on planning and engineering and design services. So when the grant opportunities come, the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, we're ready to go. That's one of the reasons we also invested in more personnel for resiliency, because we know there's going to be infrastructure and dollars coming down from the federal government. We want to be poised to take advantage of that. The same is true in parks. When I took office, we didn't have an open space and park plan that was updated, which prevented us from getting state grants. We never want to be in that position. We want to be aggressive, go after dollars. And what I find are state and federal partners want to work with cities and towns who they know can get stuff done, where there's going to be a good outcome. And so one begets the other. Investing in people, investing in planning helps garner additional dollars to actually do the work. And we've been really aggressive in that space. Many of our parks have been upgraded with benefit of state and federal resources. We've purchased some open space like downtown, the Charlotte Fortin Park, which is continuing to be a place of activities and programs. And we see that only growing as the sites around it are developed and access to the waterfront. And we've got our Signature Parks Initiative, a $16 million bond, where as we approach our 400th, we felt it was really important for us to put down a marker and sort of create a gift for the next generation. If you think about the forefathers, people who sat in my seat before I did, and for many years, somewhere along the line, we acquired these amazing waterfront spaces, the Willows, Winter Island, Forest River Park, Palmer Cove, Salem Common. But how do we invest in them? How do we make sure that the next generation is going to be able to enjoy these gems? There were capital investments made in these places, and now it's sort of our turn to do that. And looking forward through our Signature Parks Initiative in creating places where people can make memories, where we can be better, stewards of the environment, but most importantly, that we have green spaces that are also going to be positive contributors to our environment as we go forward. Two last things, and then I'm going to wrap up. I'm looking at the time, and I don't know, I talk pretty fast, but not fast enough, I guess. So two quick things. One, local economy. We're really excited about how we're coming out of this pandemic. Nervous about October, to be clear, but Salem, we formed an economic development, recovery, and revitalization task force early. We already had really strong partnerships here, whether it was the Salem Partnership, Salem Main Streets, Salem Chamber, the Destination Salem. We have a community that works together, that finds lanes for everybody to sort of take their share of the work. And what we're seeing is we actually have more businesses, not less. Our COVID impacts on the economy, while they were in place for sure during COVID, there were shutdowns. The bounce back, the post-pandemic recovery has been very, very strong. We need to continue keeping people safe. I hope folks know we have a mask mandate that starts on the 23rd. We're going to be watching data. We continue to watch that data on a daily basis. We are seeing an uptick. Nothing right now that I would say worries me greatly. The most important thing we can do going forward is get more people vaccinated. Only 50% of age eligible young adults and youth, so between the age of 12 and 29, are vaccinated. That's my worry. When you have, that means 1 out of 2 people in our high school, right? 1 out of 2 young people, if you're at a downtown bar or watering hole, may not be vaccinated, right? And that's a scary sense to me with this Delta variant. And as more people are unvaccinated, we know more variants can take hold. And the fear is that we have a variant that's not susceptible or not responsive to the current vaccine. So please, if you have a young person in your life, please get vaccinated. If you want to talk to somebody, I will put you in touch with our hospital president. We just did our podcast today. Wealth of knowledge. And if there's natural hesitancies that people may have, we want to put them in place with information. But the economy here is thriving. We think that's a good thing. We want to continue to invest in a city that welcomes people from around the world, but we also want to have jobs for people who live here. And that means looking at infotech, life sciences. We know that we're seeing growth in our tourism and hospitality industry. That takes work too. We're a little bit more natural in those places. As the return to work outcomes might be different, are we able to sort of recognize that and put some people to work locally in jobs that may have been in Boston before? And we think there's space to do that, not just in Salem, but as a region. I chair the North Shore Alliance for Economic Development, and the conversation we're having is polling our CEOs who live locally but may have offices someplace else, and working with our larger companies to see, hey, how do you put more of a focus on the place where you live, knowing that nobody really wants to go back to commuting into Boston. There may be an opportunity for less space that can be used here and less expensive space. We're a pretty good deal. So we continue to look at ways to diversify our local economy. And then lastly will just be diversity. I think we're fortunate in Salem. One of the reasons I chose to raise my family here is because of the diverse individuals who live here, that my kids could go to school where not everyone got an iPhone 10 or 12 or whatever the number they're on now the minute it came out, that my kids had sleepovers with friends, some of whom lived on Chestnut Street, some of whom lived on Salem Street. They really had an opportunity to have an experience living with and enjoying the company of others who don't necessarily celebrate the same holidays, have the same, parental setup. And I thought that was really important. I think they've benefited from it as they become young adults. But we also know that we are not a city, we're not immune, as welcoming and inclusive as we strive to be. We're definitely not a city that's immune from barriers that definitely exist. And forming the Race Equity Task Force was really about putting a convening together and helping understand how we can do more as a community to support and understand where we have systemic biases, where that racism is impacting our ability to make sure everyone who lives in our community has the same opportunities to be great, whether it's in education or healthcare or housing, and certainly in public safety. I think we've got work to do. I think our community is a thinking community. And if there's a place where we can influence policy and recognize that when we all do well, we all do well. So we're excited about bringing on board the first diversity, equity, and inclusion position in Salem, a director that's right now is out being advertised. It's something I hope that will serve as an implementer of some of the recommendations coming out of RTF, help us get better as a city organization, right? We employ a lot of people, we buy services. How do we ensure that we're being thoughtful and mindful of wanting to support a diverse economy as a city? And then how do we also think about that role for community members? And how do we measure that? This was the beginning of work but we know we have so much more to do in that space. And so I'm looking forward to, as we move forward, ensuring that we can be better at being this inclusive, welcoming city that we are striving to be. I'm going to hold there because I feel like I've been doing a ton of talking, and I want to be mindful of your time, and certainly want to hear from you if there are questions, issues, concerns, things that we can work on together. Please.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kim. Let's see, let me just remove the spotlight here so we can see all the questions. So we're starting with Jeff, I see, has a question. So I'll let you start, Jeff Cohen.
Hi, Mayor. How are you?
Hey, Jeff.
So, as you know, SAFE and CERC, the Sustainability Committee, have lobbied to have a Sustainability and Resiliency Department for a long time. It's, as you said, the only way to get us to where we need to be. There's a misconception that making our community, our individual properties, residential or commercial, more sustainable is a burden financially, but it's actually a benefit to individuals, to businesses, to nonprofits in our community. And I know you're supportive of the Green Building Ordinance in whatever form that will take. So between that, which 40%, according to Resilient Together, 40% of greenhouse gases in Salem come out of buildings. So if you could talk a little bit about why that's so important, and then I do have one follow-up question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to support the efforts of CERC. We want to put people behind these policies so we can implement them. We know the greenhouse gas emissions, we're not going to, as I said, run or escape that. So anything we can do to be more efficient while also being more mindful of steps that we can take as we grow going forward to reduce certainly our reliance on fossil fuels and become more efficient are going to be pluses. Did you have a specific question in there, Jeff? I'm sorry, I was trying to respond to somebody in the chat.
No, I think that's good. I'll ask the follow-up. So a lot of people are not aware, but the school solar projects on the Bentley School and the Witchcraft Heights School not only save the city $300,000 or $400,000 a year, but almost $1 million of revenue is coming back to the city. But really very important, as you said, that we're not going to be able to outrun the climate crisis. My concern is more on resiliency. The most vulnerable physical areas in Salem, unfortunately, have the highest ratio of marginalized communities. And it's really important at some point that we develop a resiliency ordinance to make sure that we know what to do when we have areas in Salem that are uninhabitable. If you could speak to that, that would be great. And thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we want to try and do more of the modeling. You know, some of you may have been part of a program that that NOAA was involved in. And we just got a grant for the Point neighborhood to actually do an overlay and modeling and really trying to look at where do we adapt, where do we restore, where do we retreat, and how we make decisions about that as a community. I don't think it's up to the mayor or one commission to do that. I think it's a collective effort to understand where are the most vulnerable places. We know we've done a vulnerability analysis, but what are the actual adaptive strategies? Jeff, you've heard me say this before. I feel like tackling climate change is a little bit like eating an elephant. Like, where do you start? And it's like one bite at a time, but we've got to figure out how we're going to prioritize those adaptation measures that you mentioned, or that you noted as that's the work. Like, that is the work. Where the resources are for it. You know, should Salem be looking at a betterment, you know, on every property owner to put that money back into climate change that we all benefit from? I mean, those are where our, you know, I would say our thinking is, how do we do this better now that we have this plan? And how do we decide what's the rating system look like? And the state has one. We just wrapped up some really good work. I think that CERC will be seeing some of it with a fellow from Harvard that's tied into how the state's going to be helping communities standardize how they rate their approaches to addressing resiliency.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for kind of keeping orderly. So I have kind of, if you have a question, feel free to either use the raise hand function or pop it in the chat, and I will go in the order as I receive both of them. So right now my order is John Mahoney, then Bonnie Bain, and then I see a question from Linda Stark and a question from Gina Maniscalco. Sorry if I butchered that. That I will read out kind of in that order. So John Mahoney, take it away.
Hello, Mayor. I got a couple of questions. I live in Ward 7, directly across from Steve Dibble, to be exact. Shetland Park has been a big issue here in Ward 7 of how we're going to develop it and what's going to go on there. I don't think we have any choice, but Shetland Park is going to be developed. How will it be developed? Traffic is a big concern with people in and out of Shetland Park. There's not many choices. Harbor Street's going to get plugged up, Derby Street. Should it be residential with rush hour? Should it be commercial with traffic in and out? I hear that commercial generates more tax dollars. I'd just like to hear your response to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks so much for asking that question, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation around Shetland Park. As you know, Shetland was owned for many years by the Lappin family, who used it primarily as a commercial space. It was recently purchased, maybe 2-3 years ago. I don't know the exact timeline, but in recent history by this prime group whose business primarily is self-storage. I think they may have other commercial properties. They paid $77 million for the property. We had an inclination when they paid that much, they might want to do something else, but really didn't have a strong idea what that would entail. The site is definitely something that has impacts, as you mentioned. It's in the heart of our downtown, people getting in and getting out of it. It's one of our largest concentrations of jobs and commercial property. The site's historic, largest, first original steam cotton mill in Salem, in New England, and certainly in Salem. May have actually been in America. It was burned to the ground in the Great Salem Fire of 1914, and that's why it was rebuilt with it's a hulking concrete structure, I think largely influenced by the fire that happened there. It's also, for us, a place that probably isn't at its highest and best use. It's on this beautiful harbor. The way the buildings were laid out and built in 1915 and 1916 and what they were used for are quite different. The neighborhood was built around it, supported largely by the workforce that was employed in the mills, usually waves of immigrants from lots of different places, from French Canadian workers, now largely Latinx from a range of countries, but primarily the DR. We see it as a really important site in our community and not something that can just be bantied about as some potential redevelopment. My opponent, who your neighbor, I guess, has been whipping up, this notion that we're putting housing there, we're supporting luxury housing there, we're supporting any growth. And the exact opposite is true in terms of what's transpired. Both he and I were on a notice that came out of nowhere for Shetland Park owners filing an environmental notification form with the state saying they wanted to build up to 1,400 units. As soon as I saw that, I reached out to Shetland right away and said, I am absolutely not in favor of this. I suggest you pull that state permit request. It was a MEPA filing is what it's called. They indicated to me that, well, they were doing that because they knew that MEPA was going to be a multi-year process and they wanted to work with us. I said, that's not how you start a conversation, telling us what you want to do. This site is not only important to them as property owners, it's important to our city for all the reasons I mentioned previously: commercial jobs, commercial tax revenue, commercial property, jobs. And if you want to do something on that site as a property owner, certainly anything near that idea of 1,400 units is absurd to me for many of the reasons you mentioned, but I don't think it's at its highest and best use. And I think some of the things that they're talking about, bringing back blocks, breaking down barriers, folks who live in the Point neighborhood know that it's almost like the Point's over here and Shetland's over here and nobody crosses over. And there's an opportunity to embrace and provide public space and access to that waterfront and the neighborhood to have amenities that they could be served by. But it doesn't happen with one party. It's going to take engagement. I think the closest alignment I would have is what transpired down at Suffolk Downs in East Boston, where neighborhood stakeholders, city officials, the owner of the property, the redeveloper, who was interested, spent months really queuing in on, okay, what are the pros? What are the opportunities at this site? What are the challenges? How do we address impacts? How do we look at trade-offs? What does that mean for our community overall? I don't want to lose jobs there. I want to make sure we have ample commercial space. I also don't think Shetland can't be touched and nothing can happen there. But it really does, much like, look, we had a power plant. We had a coal-fired power plant, our largest taxpayer, 65 acres on the waterfront. We had an engaged process around feasibility reuse, multiple stakeholders who and input from our community. How do we get over the hurdle? This thing's closing, something else is going to go here. How do we make sure it's going to work for our community? That's the type of process I would like to see happen, hopefully with an engaged owner, with somebody who actually wants to be involved in the discussion and values the community as a partner, not just a bunch of noise, right? True engagement. And normally that's when you end at a place that is better than where you started. So that's my hope. But it certainly isn't just accepting their plan or thinking that nothing's ever going to happen there and can't. I think there's a place we can meet and do something positive.
I hope Chris doesn't complain because I'm just breaking in and talking without invitation. Mayor, one thing that would be useful is participating in some of the South Salem meetings with the developers. There have been holding meetings in ridiculous places that limit the amount of discussion. One of them was in a room with absolutely no air conditioning on one of the hottest days of the summer. Another one was in a room where the AC units were so loud, nobody can hear what they were talking about. We could really use some Salem city engagement there, specifically from you and your team. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know, Steve Dibble is present at every one of those meetings, and it has an impact in our work.
I mean, I think it has an impact not just in South Salem. That's actually in Ward 1 and Ward 5. It's not in Ward 7, but I hear what you're saying, John. I think there needs to be a constructive dialogue with an urban professional leading it. It doesn't sound like that's what's happening now. And I'm sorry that's the approach that they've taken. But my hope is that there can be a constructive dialogue with true stakeholders where you've got agendas and they're open to the public for everybody and accessible, but there's key stakeholders that are obviously at the table. Thanks.
Bonnie, before I get to you, I'm just going to let everybody know, I'm just going to extend this for 15 more minutes, and I'm sure we'll be able to find the time and the rest just because we have a few more questions. I want to make sure that we get to them. So Bonnie, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, Mayor. Thank you for being here. I am a pretty new resident of Salem. We just bought our home in November of 2020, and we lived here for a year, and I just sort of observed. And I love this city, and I appreciate all the things that you've done to make it better. I've done my research and understand a lot of the ups and downs it's had, and I like where it's going. I am also a new mother, and I think a lot about our schools. I'm from Stockton, California, and I'm proud to have gone to the public schools there. And I wanted my children to be able to go to public schools as well. And I know that there's been some really interesting attempts in the past, and it looks like we're coming back with an immersion program in the schools, which I'm excited about. And then I've heard that we're doing some preschool, like free preschool. I would love to hear just general thoughts on how that's going and your thoughts for the future of our public schools.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I should have incorporated that into my talking points because I think schools and public education is the most important work we do at the local level. It's the lion's share of our budget, and it's just an investment that has, unlimited returns. I think Salem, we are a diverse community. I want to call out the fact that it is more challenging to teach in a diverse community. If you're from Stockton, you probably realize that. And lots of times people judge the success of our schools just by looking at standardized test scores. And I don't think standardized test scores are bad. I'm glad we do it. I think it's important that we know where we are at in benchmarks and how we are seeing growth happen. But it doesn't tell you whether a school is working hard and doing well. It normally tells you what the socioeconomic demographics are of your community. I feel like we have a really strong school system. that has had some struggles with leadership at the high school in particular, where I think we are on a really good and strong trajectory. We've got a principal there who was a principal in Salem before and has come back. And I think we have outstanding work going on amongst our teachers, caring, dedicated staff. A number of our administrators and principals in our schools actually came up through the ladder as teachers. As part of teacher leadership programs, we've got a strong pipeline there. We have a leader in our superintendent, Dr. Zweig, who for the first time, I think we have somebody who has a true understanding of what it means to be a superintendent in a diverse semi-urban environment, which is what we are as a community. I think lots of people want to think of Salem schools as they might have been in 1970 or 1980 or 1990 prior to having standardized test scores. And we're not that anymore. And I think Salem was a little slow to change with respect to, oh, we have more ELL students. We have students who have real poverty struggles. And how are we providing supports necessary for all those kids to be successful? I really do feel like the stars are aligned with both support systems. We have well-funded schools. So we are not a place that we have decided we're not going to provide adequate funding. We have a caring and dedicated teaching staff. And I think we have a superintendent in a central office that recognizes the push and pull between how we provide supports, how we hold people accountable, and do so in a way that's designed to support kids and families. It's more of a student-centered, approach to learning. We saw it with a really quick pivot during COVID, but I see it more and more every day as we think about meeting students where they are, trying to get them to the highest successful outcomes possible in a way that's accountable with a district that has a strategic plan that's following it, that's baking in equity as a component here to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our students who certainly have the highest challenges, where they're coming from some tough circumstances, but not disregarding students who have supports and maybe don't need the range of supports that others do. Some of the specific programs you mentioned, we are moving towards universal pre-K right now. We just start, so that's 4-year-olds going to school. We've got 8 classrooms, 4 in the district, 4 outside of the district, where we're either subsidizing the cost at a private center. It's sort of a mixed model, but our goal is to have all 4-year-olds in school, some sort of a program, preferably one that is aligned. So we're also providing professional development and supports to the private payers. And we feel that's going to boost both academic performances and also help families, knowing how important childcare is. I was a 3 drop-off parent for years, and here's the second mortgage payment. Like, this will be a help for families, a help for students, and we think long-term support for our schools. And we're moving on the early college path at the high school level. We've got a high school redesign plan geared towards looking at both early college and early career pathways. So more focus on our CTE programs, how they're aligned with regional workforce needs. And we've got a university right here. So we were, initial adopters of early college with Salem State. We've got kids who are graduating almost with an associate's degree or enough credits to have 2 years of college, which means it's a confidence boost, it's a savings for them, and it's a real sort of pipeline to making sure for students who may not have thought about going to college, hey, I can do it, and I'm already doing it. So I'm excited about what's happening in Salem Public Schools, the direction that we're heading in. And I also just want to say it's the most important work and the hardest work we do. If you're a teacher in a district that has a diverse population, there's 20 sets of eyes. We have low class sizes, so there's anywhere from 16 to 20 sets of eyes coming back at you that all have very different needs. And I think we're trying to make sure that we're a district that's holding ourselves accountable for the success of all of those students. So I'd encourage parents, especially parents of young children, to come visit our schools. I think far too often we have parents and families who think, I'm going to move out, I'm going to go to Danvers, I'm going to go to another suburban community, more homogeneous population for the schools. I beg you to come in and look, right? Because I think you'll see a lot of good work going on, kids that are supported. And I think a lot of the young adults who are moving here and young families, they want an experience where their kids are with, maybe with students who don't always look like them, are taking advantage of the diverse population that's here. And I think there's a lot we can do to improve, but I know that we're doing great work already. My 3 kids went to Salem Public Schools, couldn't be more thrilled with where they're at and what they're doing.
Thank you, Mayor. Bonnie, do you have any follow-up? No, cool. Let's see, so I have 2 questions. John, I see you raised your hand, but I'm gonna prioritize these questions in chat for the next 10 minutes. So we'll see if we can get to you, but just so you're aware. I see you. From Linda Stark, I have a question. Will businesses be given signs for their windows regarding mask mandate? Counter, will they be receiving any support from Salem PD in case there is pushback from customers?
Yes and yes. So yeah, we have signs that'll be going up to make sure folks know there's an indoor mask mandate. We'll have mask ambassadors back. We'll be having a support system with PD or others should people not want to comply.
Awesome. Let's see, I'm gonna look for Linda. Linda, was that adequate? Do you have any follow-up? I don't think so.
That was fine. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Let's see, from Gina, I have, how much has Salem received from the American Rescue Plan and how are you thinking you'll spend it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're excited about having resources to do some of the things that we know are going to be beneficial to our community. So we're anticipating getting about $35 million in total. That doesn't include monies that we might be able to leverage from the state or other federal ARPA buckets, but directly to the city. We'll have a stakeholder group that will be involved in sort of shaping what are the policies, principles, values that we want to ascribe to those dollars. There are limitations on what you can spend it in under the ARPA regulations. And we also want to make sure we're being thoughtful and forward thinking about long-term economic success. There's probably some do now things and some things that we hope to invest in that can position us well for many more years to come. So surveys are going out, stakeholder groups will be formed, trying to get our arms around ideas, suggestions, and again, areas of focus that make the most sense for us and how best to leverage it for the other resources that we know are going to be available.
Excellent, thank you. Gina, was there any follow-up you'd like to add to that? I can see you, so if you just shake it.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, by the way, for trying to say my last name. If it's any consolation, the last time the mayor tried to introduce me to the new police chief, she massacred it. So, okay. You're in good shape. So, Mayor, good to see you again. So, thanks for the answer on that. Can you talk a little bit about who the stakeholders might be?
Yeah, I think we're thinking about, members of the council, some of the members of boards and commissions, neighborhood associations, folks who have we certainly have department heads. I don't know if they'll be on the stakeholder group, but a convening of key people in our community so we can certainly get input in a way that's going to enable us to make sure we're being equitable, right? And being thoughtful about what other needs are.
Might we use some of it in the schools?
So the schools have a separate bucket of funding. It's called ESSER funding. And so they have approximately $9 million that they have unto themselves. That comes after some first year funding for, through the CARES Act and things like that. So we'll have I would say a school related process, and some of this ARPA funding could certainly be used. There's some overlap. We have to follow the regulations, which are a little more wordy than we thought they might be. And there's a ton of reporting and all of that, but overall, huge opportunity for our community. We just want to make sure we're leveraging it to its maximum potential.
Our next question is from Melissa Faulkner, who asked, can you please talk about the decision to change our school transportation to NRT and how the transition is going with our families regarding communication of such a significant change?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question, Melissa, because I think this, anytime you think about stopping what you're currently doing and changing, especially when it involves unions and collective bargainings, I think it can be mischaracterized at time. And so the city, and I shouldn't say the city, the school department for school bus transportation, 2/3 of our transportation has been contracted out for years, decades, as long as I can remember anyways. We did have a small population of buses that we maintained and kept in a small number of routes, about 1/3, 11 buses or 11 bus drivers and 11 bus monitors. At the end of this fiscal year, we've just had a really tough time managing a school transportation program, staff-wise, bus-wise, the actual implementation of getting buses repaired, getting buses on time, having staff and drivers showing up, and even a transportation director. At the end of the school year, we had 4 individuals come to us and say they were retiring, longtime employees who fit within our bucket of bus employees and bus drivers and monitors. And the school superintendent said, we are really struggling. I'm getting calls at 6 a.m. that we don't have people to drive buses. We had drivers who were coming in when they were sick because they knew nobody else could drive their route. We weren't good at it, to be honest. When they put out the bid, the contract was up for the 2/3 that were always contracted. They incorporated these routes and said to the company, hey, what can you do? And they could pick it up for savings, for sure. But I want to say this decision that was made by the school committee was not driven by savings or money. This is one of those circumstances where the school superintendent and staff said, we aren't good at this. We can't get students and families what they need and do it well. I'm not confident about that. And it just didn't happen this year. I want to say we've had struggles with hiring, with getting bus routes right, the buses that we operated. And we didn't feel good about our ability to run a program. Despite investing $1 million over the last 5 years in new buses, we have one fleet management within our public services that manages buses and police cars and DPS vehicles and COA vans. And it's just not working as well as it should. They had the conversation with us around what can we do. We wanted to make sure we took care of our employees. So every employee was offered a job within Salem Public Schools, offered the opportunity to go work for NRT if they wanted to. NRT is paying employees significantly more than we were. I shouldn't say significantly. I think it ended up being like $4,000 or $5,000 more a year. I know the superintendent, I was involved in some of these. We had one-on-one meetings with all the staff. It was not easy. AFSCME did not like losing these employees. I don't like harming our collective bargaining unions, but I also know that we really needed to have a system that worked to get students and families the services they need. So so we ended up keeping a very small handful of employees to maintain a few buses for more internal routes that we may have, and work to find jobs for all the other folks who are part of that system. So I feel good that we didn't harm the individuals, the people. I feel good that we're going to have better service. I don't like the way it was characterized as, we were doing union busting or something like that. I don't view it that way. I benefit from a union contract. My husband's in the bricklayers union. I feel like we want to be fair and have been fair to our employees. But in this particular scenario, we have to be able to pick up kids, get buses to stops, and do that effectively. And frankly, educating kids is really hard. Educating them is the school's job. And in this particular instance, I supported the superintendent's recommendation to have NRT take over the third of the routes that we weren't having, and making sure that we were protecting the people who were impacted and who were doing great work for us throughout their time here. Hope that answers the question, Melissa.
So Melissa does follow up, just mentioning her son, Joshua, goes out of district and he's contracted with NRT. They have had issues hiring and retaining staff. And also they have a policy with special needs students that they can only wait 5 minutes over the time they arrive. So her concern is our kids and our families. I was wondering, you had a response.
Yeah, I think everybody's having an issue hiring staff right now, for sure. So I'm not necessarily surprised by that, but happy to work on that. We wanted to make sure that we contracted with a bus company or a transportation company that was capable of meeting our needs. Some of these policies around wait times are important, that, parents and families who are waiting at other bus stops or are waiting on picking up kids, that it can serve all of those needs well. And I'm happy to follow up with you, Melissa, if you want directly, or if you're feeling like there's an issue that's still unresolved.
Right. So I'm going to give the last question here to finish up. Marcia Finkelstein, who I don't know if you would prefer, I can just read it out since you have it in the chat, Marcia, or if you'd like to ask it personally.
I basically would like to know which communities, parts of Salem are the most vaccine hesitant or the least vaccinated, and what the plan is, the strategy is to, educate and use all the things at our disposal to encourage people to get vaccinated.
Yeah, great question. So I can't tell you by geography because we don't get that information from the state. I get age, I get race, I get gender. And so we know we have 77% of Salem residents have at least one shot completed, which is great. That's a nice high percentage, but it's also a little misleading when you unpack that number. There's much higher vaccination rates among our older population. So between the age of 12 and 29, we're about 50% vaccinated, which is a big concern for us as we're heading back to school. One of the reasons that the school committee supported universal masking in our schools So not only among those who are unvaccinated, but everybody will be masked up, students, staff. We've got weekly testing going on in schools. We were innovators in that space a year ago. That will continue. So we have pooled testing for all students and staff, again, trying to cut down on virus transmission. And then if you are unvaccinated, you are going to have to be tested twice a week if you're a staff member. If you're an unvaccinated student and are participating in activities, be it sports, band, drama, you are also going to have to be tested more regularly, wear masks during those activities, and show proof of consultation with a physician that you've talked about vaccination. One of the challenges we're having is the hesitancy. Think about it, under 16, you have to have parental permission, right? So we know that we have kids who may want to get vaccinated, or they're not necessarily the decision makers. And again, 50% are vaccinated, 50% aren't. So we really want to be able to engage with parents. We're looking at doing things like Doc on a Box. So we'll have doctors available to talk with parents on different city blocks with our COVID neighborhood ambassadors, and combine that with our mobile vaccination units in various neighborhoods. We are incentivizing getting vaccinated, things like Market Basket gift cards. We're at Market Basket handing out $25 gift cards. We're looking at providing additional incentives, youth-related incentives, youth and families, whether it's a Target gift card, youth-specific swag as we're moving into the high school years for kids who are over 16 and can make that choice. But mostly it's about trying to get people to talk to their physician, because we think some of the hesitancy among our youth anyways is tied to parents who are feeling vaccine hasn't been tested, or have heard information around fertility, which is incorrect, but nonetheless, it's a strong feeling that they have. So COVID ambassadors, encouraging and requiring in certain instances consultations with physicians, Doc on a Block, what we're calling it, partnering with our healthcare providers like the North Shore Community Health Center and others to really engage directly with people where they're at, and then incentivizing. With the older population, we're looking at a vaccine clinic at Notch, a vaccine clinic at the marina, the Regatta Marina, the Regatta Beer Tent, I guess, places where we know there are young adults that are going, and incentivizing them with gift cards for breweries, cell phone bills, things that seem to be attracting interest. That's our goal, is to try and get these numbers up. There are a number of our businesses who are also interested in only allowing people in who have been vaccinated. So while it's not something the Board of Health has required, we would certainly partner and work with any business that wanted to put in place sort of a Vax Passport check-in program to sort of serve as another way for people to know, if you want to get vaccinated, these are some of the things that you're going to be able to do. And I should say, Marcia, some of the vaccine gaps around age overlap with race. So our Black and brown population is not as vaccinated at the same rate and percentage as our white population. A lot of that overlaps with those young adults and age figures as well.
Thanks, Kim.
So thank you very much, Mayor. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, just wrap up with one more. Somebody was asking if we could just have 2-minute elevator pitch as we get into the election cycle for why we should, as a committee, or individual members of the committee, I should say, why anyone here listening should support you going into this election.
Yeah, sure. Again, really appreciate the opportunity to come before you as both a member of the committee, but for all the work that you're doing in our city. I really feel like Salem's at a crossroads as we move towards 2026 and our 400th anniversary. And if we truly are a city that says we want to make sure we're diverse, that we celebrate our history, that we recognize that Salem is also going to be changing and growing. We're not a bedroom community to Boston. We're a place that for 400 years has evolved and grown and changed. And I think that takes leadership to ensure that you're shaping that growth and that you're incentivizing the type of growth you want to see happening here. Moving forward, I feel like we'll have some resources and the ability to really better understand what Salem's needs are and how we achieve them. It takes competency, and it takes someone who's got the planning and the skill set, the professional management that I've been able to bring to the table over the last several years. Realizing many of the plans and hopes that we've had and putting them into action and implementing them. I'm jazzed up about the opportunity to continue in that role. I think Salem has a really bright future. We've got this proud past, and I'd love the opportunity to continue to engage with community members who are here, being thoughtful about how we manage what's happening in Salem going forward, whether that's in the housing front, the transportation front, and climate change. We know doing nothing is not an option in our community, and it does take active leadership. That's the type of leadership I hope to be able to continue to provide in Salem, and engage with community members. Everything we do in Salem, those of you who are here, knows that we have a lot of people around the table helping to make decisions, helping to provide input. I feel like I'm fortunate to be in a city that's so engaged and wanting to really harness that opportunity over the next 4 years to continue to see Salem grow and thrive and be a place that we're all proud to call home. Inclusive, welcoming, a place that works for and welcomes everyone. And I'd love the opportunity to gain your support. We're working hard. The doors have been hot over this summer, but I think really favorable. And you know, when you've been in office for a while, you're definitely going to have some individuals who are not happy with the way things are going. But I got to tell you, I really enjoy talking with people, understanding where they're coming from, and most importantly, working with them to get to a place that moves Salem forward. I think we've been able to do that and hope to be able to continue to do so, and would love everyone's support.
Thank you so much, Mayor Driscoll. Really appreciate you coming and joining us today, giving us the update and being willing to answer questions and speaking for pretty much an hour straight there. So I know how much that can be, particularly in the Zoom environment. So thank you so much for taking the time, taking the extra time, and being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's see.